So let's pick up on both conversations then. The Zelenskyy and Netanyahu visits to the White House. Let's bring in U.S. correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease, who joins us now from New York. Sherwin, let's start with Ukraine. This has become something of a war of attrition, hasn't it? Where a diplomatic off-ramp is not all that imminent. What might be some of the key takeaways that we expect from the Zelenskyy meeting with the U.S. president?
Well, the difference, I think, the first takeaway is the fact that we did not have the live television cameras in the Oval Office when either of those meetings happened. In terms of the president's calendar today, it was supposed to be closed for Zelenskyy but open for Netanyahu. But after Netanyahu arrived at the White House, there were no, pool feeds from those dual bilateral sort of in your living room type scenario, as was experienced by Zelenskyy himself in February last year, right? Who can forget that meeting? And of course, President Ramaphosa's meeting in May last year, where everything was illuminated via live television cameras. We don't have that kind of insight. What we do have is President Volodymyr Zelenskyy tweeting this, posting on X right after the meeting. He said, "I had a good meeting with President Trump at the Oval Office. Thank you for everything we do together to protect the lives of Ukrainians and advance peace. First and foremost, I offered President Trump our condolences on the passing of Lindsey Graham." Of course, Lindsey Graham's funeral, the Republican Senator Tula Sizwe, underway at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. right now. And President Trump, due to eulogize the late Republican senator, Zelenskyy called him a true friend of Ukraine. And then goes on to say, the president and I discussed licenses for Patriot interceptor production and several other ideas that could help. We also spoke about diplomacy. It's important that the diplomatic process be reinvigorated. So two things you're getting there from Volodymyr Zelenskyy. One is these Patriot interceptor missiles, right? This is not just a war on the eastern front of Ukraine. This is very much a war that is being fought with long-range drones and long-range ballistic missiles. In the main, the ballistic missiles from Russia. Ukraine now deploying long-distance drones that are taking this war into Russian territory, Moscow having to look over its shoulder in many instances. And so the military escalation continues, but Zelenskyy also pointing to a diplomatic off-ramp. So two things really emanate from that meeting. He is seeking more defensive weaponry in terms of, seeking to blunt Russia's ballistic missile impacts that sometimes get through those air defenses, seeking to fortify that, and then really talking about the long-term goal of getting to a political off-ramp. But as Ukraine has demonstrated an ability on the battlefield to withstand Russia's aggression, Russia's moves westward in terms of taking Ukrainian territory. I'll read you a headline to Tula Sizwe from the Wall Street Journal, which says, impressed by Ukraine's battlefield gains, Trump warms to Zelenskyy. So, the posture one imagines in the White House Oval Office today, quite different from what Zelenskyy might have experienced in February last year.
Yeah, what a difference a year makes, and developments on the battlefront, as well as elsewhere, I suppose, politically. Let's turn now to Iran. This was a war that started as a joint attack between Israel and the United States, and that was at the end of February this year. What are our expectations from what is the 8th meeting between Netanyahu and President Trump since Trump returned to office?
So when we say it's an 8th meeting, one imagines just a warm relationship. That might well be true, but also what is true is we have seen fractures in this relationship. In the main, Israel's intransigence towards the possibility of a diplomatic off-ramp. They want to seek an escalation, perhaps towards potential regime change in Iran. That does not seem to be within the appetite of the current U.S. president, that has again now withdrawn a military escalation to allow a diplomatic off-ramp. We also understand that there are elections in Israel at the end of October, and Netanyahu, based on reporting that we have seen, is seeking Donald Trump's endorsement, but then also to convince him about Israeli intelligence as it relates to Iran's uranium enrichment and where they might have stored that uranium enrichment, possibly in a place called Pickaxe Mountain, this heavily fortified nuclear site that is buried deep in the mountain, which Donald Trump has had on his radar in terms of potential military escalation, but has not gone in that direction yet. What I will give you is the words of Israel's ambassador to the United Nations, speaking here in New York earlier today about the meeting between his prime minister and the US president. This is what Danny Danon had to say.
We are grateful for our deep partnership with the US. We fought shoulder to shoulder against Iran, and we are prepared to continue supporting the US in pursuing peace and stability in the region. I'm sure that will be the number one on the agenda in the meeting today between the Prime Minister and the President. I cannot tell you which direction it will go. There are different options. We will definitely would like to hear from the President what he wants to see in the next coming days or weeks. We are prepared for all scenarios. We are prepared for all scenarios, and we will discuss it with the President.
So, Tula Sizwe, while I cannot give you a readout of the meeting that happened between the Israeli Prime Minister and the President of the US today, I will tell you what Donald Trump told Fox News in a morning interview this morning. He said he understood that Netanyahu would seek to discuss intelligence as it related to Iran's Pickaxe Mountain, an underground nuclear site that has been the subject of discussions around where Iran might have stored its enriched uranium. He also says that he said that he understood that Netanyahu wanted him to remain involved in the conflict. Quote, "I know exactly what's going on at Pickaxe. It's not a big problem." And he also apparently expressed some dissatisfaction with the fact that Prime Minister Netanyahu was elevating the discussion points with the president in public before the meeting, and Trump didn't apparently take very kindly to that. So, yes, it's an ironclad relationship, but there are some fractures appearing in this personal relationship between Donald Trump and Bibi Netanyahu.
Again, the passage of time being key in revealing those fractures that you allude to there. Thank you for that reporting. Sharon Bryce Peace is SABC News correspondent out in New York.